Shantae Williams stood in front of the mirror in her tiny bathroom in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, examining 2 pills in her palm. Estradiol, a small blue lifeline. Every morning, the same thing. Every morning, a reminder. She washed the pills down with tap water and ran her hand over her face, wiping away the moisture. In the reflection, she saw a woman with dark brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes full of struggle. The woman she had fought for her entire life. Outside the window, New Orleans was waking up, sticky with humidity, pulsing with jazz, forever balancing between a celebration and a funeral march. The city that had taken her in, partly because no one here cared about anything as long as you didn't get involved in other people's business. The city where she could be herself, almost. Shantae opened her closet and chose a white short-sleeved blouse and a narrow black knee-length skirt. The uniform of the manager of the Royal Quarter, a small hotel just 2 blocks from her apartment. The job that paid the rent, the medicine, and sometimes the evenings with Leon. Leon. The name that made her heart beat faster and gave her butterflies in her stomach. The name she was afraid to say in public. New Orleans police officer Leon Freeman, 38 years old, married, with an impeccable reputation, her secret, her pain, her happiness. Her phone buzzed with a message. 7 tonight, our place? Shantae smiled at the screen. Her fingers fluttered across the keyboard. I'll be there, I miss you. Their place was a small house on stilts in the suburbs, the remnants of a family inheritance. No paper trail, no hotel registrations, no witnesses. The perfect hideaway for a forbidden love. On her way to work, Shantae replayed their first meeting in her head. It happened at the Blue Cat Bar almost a year ago. A bar for locals, located 2 blocks from the police station. It was a place where New Orleans black cops gathered to forget about their jobs. Shantae shouldn't have been there. She had stopped in to escape a sudden tropical downpour, soaked to the skin, her hair ruined and her mascara running. Leon was in plain clothes, celebrating a colleague's birthday. Their eyes met across the room, and the rest of the world instantly disappeared. I noticed you right away, he told her later. You were the only splash of color on this gray, rainy day. You just saw the only woman in a bar full of men in uniform and badges, she replied, laughing. At the time, he didn't know the whole truth about her. At the time, she thought she had a chance at happily ever after. At the time, she didn't know he was married. The workday at the Royal Quarter dragged on like molasses. Shantae felt the minutes freeze in the summer heat as if time had stopped moving. Tourists came and went, asking about jazz venues, local cuisine, and real voodoo. She smiled, answered, and helped. It was a good job for a woman who knew how to hide her past. The past. It always came back in nightmares. The narrow corridors of high school, the whispers behind her back, the bullying, and then the long, painful road to transformation. 20 years ago, when she was still Sean Williams, a skinny little boy from a foster family, the world seemed like a completely different place. You're not our son, her adoptive mother said on the day she, then still he, mustered the courage to tell the truth. We don't have a daughter, her adoptive father added. Shantae often thought about her biological parents. Who were they? Why did they give her up? What had happened to them? The information on her birth certificate was sparse. African-American parents, both young, unmarried, unable to raise a child. No names, no photos. A void she had spent years trying to fill with fantasies. Hey, beautiful, a voice brought her back to reality. Leon stood behind the reception desk in plain clothes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a crew cut and a smile that always made Shantae's knees weak. Officer, she said, trying to keep her voice professional, even though her heart was beating in her throat. I'm busy today. I was passing by, he leaned on the desk. I thought you might want to have lunch. His eyes said otherwise. They sought confirmation of their evening rendezvous, wanting to steal a moment of intimacy in the middle of the workday. I can't today, Shantae smiled, putting a promise in her smile. Maybe tomorrow? He understood, nodded, and left without saying another word. That was Leon, a man of few words but decisive actions. He hadn't come for lunch. He had come to see her. The thought made her feel warmer. After lunch, it was time to go to the clinic. Every Tuesday, from 3 to 4, supportive therapy and a session with a psychologist. It was a part of her life that no one knew about, not even Leon, especially Leon. Dr. Wilson's clinic was located in a converted colonial mansion on a quiet street in the Marigny neighborhood. A white house with columns entwined with wisteria, a wide veranda, and creaky wooden floors. Shante liked this place. It was old-fashioned but welcoming, like a grandfather who may not understand the modern world but still loves his grandchildren. "Miss Williams, the doctor will be ready in 10 minutes, smiled Loretta Dupree, the clinic administrator. "Please have a seat." Loretta was a large, dark-skinned woman with gray hair and soft, understanding eyes. She had worked here forever and knew every patient by name. Shante sat down in a soft chair in the waiting room and took out her phone. Another message from Leon. "Bought you something." Her heart skipped a beat. He rarely gave gifts, too risky for a married man. What could it be? She lost herself in fantasies of an evening with Leon, his hands on her skin, his lips whispering sweet nothings. She was so caught up in her daydreams that she didn't notice the door open and a woman enter the waiting room. "Miss Freeman, the doctor will see you right after Miss Williams," Loretta said. Freeman. The surname snapped Shante out of her reverie. Coincidence? No, it couldn't be. She slowly raised her eyes. The woman was standing with her back to her, registering with Loretta, and Shante could only see her silhouette. Slender, with her hair pulled back into a neat bun. Something about her posture seemed strangely familiar. "Thank you, Loretta," the woman replied, and even the tone of her voice made Shante shudder. The woman turned, and the world around Shante froze. She was looking at her own face. The same cheekbones, the same slanted eyes, the same full lips. Even the small mole under her right eye was an exact replica. The only difference was her hairstyle and clothing. The woman was dressed more conservatively, in a cream-colored business suit, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. The woman noticed her too. She noticed and froze, slowly turning pale beneath her dark skin. "Are you all right, Miss Freeman?" Loretta asked, noticing her reaction. "Yes, I'm—" The woman couldn't take her eyes off Shante. "I thought—" At that moment, the office door opened and Dr. Wilson looked into the reception area. "Miss Williams, please come in." Shante stood up unsteadily. As she passed the woman, she felt their eyes meet again, like two mirrors reflecting each other endlessly. Who was she? Why did she look exactly like her? And why was her last name Freeman? Questions swirled in Shante's head as she mechanically followed Dr. Wilson into his office. "How are you feeling today, Miss Williams?" asked the doctor, sitting down in his chair. Shante looked at him, unable to find the words. How could she explain that she had just seen her own reflection in a stranger? How could she describe this feeling? As if the whole world had turned upside down and lost all meaning. "Dr. Wilson," she finally said. "The woman in the reception room, Miss Freeman?" He adjusted his glasses. "What about her? Didn't you notice the resemblance?" Shante leaned forward. "We look exactly alike." Dr. Wilson frowned, then his face cleared. "You know, I hadn't noticed before, but now that you mention it, there is a certain resemblance." "Some resemblance." That was the understatement of the century. They weren't just similar, they were identical, like two peas in a pod. "Doctor, it's more than a resemblance." Shante felt her heart pounding. "It's like looking in a mirror." "Miss Williams," Dr. Wilson said gently, "perhaps you should talk to Miss Freeman directly. After your session, of course." Freeman, that name again. Something inside Shante tightened with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. "Have you known her long?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Miss Freeman?" The doctor opened his notebook. "About a year. She came around the same time you did, and if I'm not mistaken, also for supportive therapy. Also." The word echoed in Shante's head. Also. So this woman, her doppelganger, was also transgender? The coincidence seemed impossible, unreal. The entire session passed in a fog. Shante answered the doctor's questions automatically, not paying attention, thinking only about the woman in the waiting room. Who was she? Why were they so alike? And why did she have the surname Freeman? When the session ended, Shante went out to the waiting room, hoping to see the mysterious Miss Freeman again. But the waiting room was empty. "Has she left already?" Shante asked Loretta. "Miss Freeman?" Loretta looked up from her computer. "Yes, she called her husband, and he said he would pick her up." Dr. Wilson agreed to reschedule the session for tomorrow. Husband. The word made Shante tense. I know it's none of my business, but did she say if she'd be back anytime soon? Loretta frowned slightly, but then smiled understandingly. She's scheduled for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. I noticed how much you look alike. It's amazing. Are you related? No. Shante shook her head. At least I don't think so. Stepping out of the clinic onto the hot street, Shante felt a wave of strange, conflicting emotions wash over her. It was a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and an almost mystical feeling, as if she had peered beyond the edge of reality and seen something she shouldn't have. One thought ran through her mind. She had to see that woman again. She had to talk to her, find out who she was. But first, she had to see Leon, today at 7 o'clock. And that date suddenly took on a whole new meaning. The house on stilts creaked and sighed like a living creature. The evening breeze from Lake Pontchartrain blew under the floorboards, penetrated through the cracks in the walls, and stirred the curtains on the windows. Shante loved these sounds. They reminded her of the ghosts of the past wandering the corridors of New Orleans. Leon lay next to her, his dark skin glistening with sweat in the dim light of the nightlight. His muscular arm wrapped around her waist, possessively, confidently. They had just made love, and Shante's body still responded to his every touch. What are you thinking about? Leon asked, propping himself up on his elbow. About us, Shante replied, not looking at him. About what's going to happen next. Leon sighed. This conversation always ended the same way, with vague promises and evasive answers. Baby, you know I can't just walk away from her. I know. Shante sat up in bed, pulling the sheet over her chest. But sometimes I get tired of waiting, tired of being a secret. You're not a secret. He touched her cheek. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years. Shante wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe him desperately. But part of her, the rational, skeptical part that had helped her survive all these years, whispered, he'll never leave his wife. You're just a fling. I brought you something. Leon got out of bed and walked over to his jacket hanging on a chair. His naked body in the moonlight resembled the sculptures of Greek gods Shante had seen in a museum. He returned with a small velvet box. What is it? Shante asked, feeling her heart beat faster. Open it. Inside was a silver ring with a small sapphire, exactly the same shade as the estradiol pills she took every morning. Symbolic. It's not what you think, Leon said quickly, noticing the look on her face. But it's a promise that one day, when I can figure everything out, we'll be together. Shante put on the ring. It fit perfectly. Like everything else about Leon, it was perfect and unbearably complicated at the same time. Thank you, she whispered, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. It's beautiful. Leon kissed her, gently, slowly, as if sealing his promise. I have to go, he said after a few minutes, pulling away. Night shift. Always the same, always leaving, always going to her, the woman whose first name Shante didn't even know, but whose last name she had accidentally discovered today at the clinic. Freeman, like Leon, and her face, which was a mirror image of Shante's. Leon, she began, not sure if she should say anything but feeling that she had to. I saw a woman at the clinic today. She looked like me, very much like me. Leon froze, pulling on his shirt. For a moment, Shante thought he tensed, but his voice sounded even. What do you mean, like you? Like a twin, Shante replied, watching his reaction closely. An identical copy, and her last name, Shante, baby. Leon leaned down and kissed her forehead. I really don't have time right now. Tell me next time, okay? He finished getting dressed and left, leaving behind only the scent of cologne and a feeling of unresolved mystery. Shante sat on the bed for a long time, twirling her new ring around her finger and thinking about the woman who looked just like her. That night, Shante hardly slept in her apartment. Her thoughts revolved around the stranger from the clinic. Who was she? Why did they look alike? And what did the coincidence of their last names mean? Shante's intuition told her that there was some kind of mystery connected with her origins. In the morning, she decided to return to the clinic. Not because it was a reception day, she was going there specifically to talk to Miss Freeman. She's scheduled for 2 o'clock, Shante remembered Loretta saying. Shante took the day off work, lying about a sudden migraine. The hotel administrator believed her. Shante rarely asked for time off, and had always been a reliable employee. At 1:45, Shante was already sitting in Dr. Wilson's reception room, leafing through a magazine she couldn't read because she was so nervous. Loretta glanced at her in surprise but said nothing. Shante tried to appear relaxed, although inside she was trembling with tension. Finally, the door opened and she walked in, yesterday's stranger. Today she was wearing a light blue dress that accentuated her figure, and her hair was loose, exactly the same texture and length as Shante's. Shante stood up. The woman noticed her and froze in the doorway, her eyes wide. "Hello," Shante said, feeling her mouth go dry. "We met yesterday. My name is Shante Williams." "Jamie," the woman replied after a pause. "Jamie Freeman," her voice. It sounded exactly like Shante's voice on the recording. The same timbre, the same intonations. Shante could see that Jamie had noticed too. "Can we talk?" Shante asked. "I think you know why." Jamie nodded slowly. "Loretta," she said to the administrator, "can we have some time alone in the break room?" "Of course, dear," Loretta replied, looking curiously from one to the other. "No one's there right now." The break room was small and cozy. A sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table, and a coffee maker that filled the room with the aroma of fresh coffee. Shante and Jamie sat across from each other, their eyes fixed on each other's faces, exact copies of each other. "This is incredible," Jamie broke the silence. "How is this even possible?" "I've been thinking about it all night," Shante replied. "And there's only one explanation. We're sisters," Jamie finished for her. "Twins." "Yes," Shante nodded. "I was adopted as a baby. What about you?" "Me too," Jamie leaned forward. "In Baton Rouge, the foster family, and then I took my husband's last name, Freeman." "I grew up in Lafayette with the Williams family," Shante said. "When's your birthday?" "June 28th, Jamie replied. 1990. Shante felt a chill run down her spine. "Mine too, June 28th, 1990. She shook her head. "That can't be a coincidence." "Why were we separated?" Jamie asked, her voice filled with pain. "Why were we given to different families?" "I don't know," Shante shrugged. "Maybe a single mother couldn't afford 2 children. Maybe one of the adoptive families only wanted 1 child." They talked for hours about their childhood, their adoptive parents, school, and about how each of them realized their true gender identity. "At 10, I knew something was wrong," Jamie said. "But it wasn't until I was 17 that I decided to say it out loud." "I was about the same age," Shante nodded. "My parents kicked me out of the house." "Me too." Jamie smiled sadly. "It seems we really are identical, not just on the outside." They avoided talking about their personal lives, as if instinctively sensing that the subject could be dangerous. Shante didn't mention Leon, and Jamie didn't talk about her husband. Instead, they shared memories from their past, discovering surprising coincidences. "I've always had this strange habit," Jamie said, rubbing her eyebrow with her index finger. "When I'm nervous." Shante laughed and made the exact same gesture. "I do that too. And everyone always notices it. And this mole," Jamie pointed to a small spot under her right eye. "I tried to cover it up when I was a teenager. I hated it." "Me too!" Shante exclaimed. "My God, this is so strange! It's like talking to myself." Time flew by. It was already dusk outside when Loretta peeked into the room to say that the clinic was closing soon. "We have to check it out," Jamie said as they stepped outside. "Take a DNA test, just to be sure." "I agree," Shante nodded. "I can order a kit online. It'll arrive in a couple of days." Jamie took out her phone. "Let's exchange numbers. And maybe you'd like to meet up on Friday? I'll be at the clinic for a scheduled consultation. At noon." "I'll be there," Shante promised. They stood facing each other, not knowing how to say goodbye. Then, acting on impulse, Shante took a step forward and hugged Jamie. It felt strange, like hugging herself, and at the same time surprisingly right, as if she had finally found the missing piece of a puzzle. "See you Friday," Shante said, stepping back. "See you Friday," Jamie echoed. Shantae walked home feeling as if the world around her had completely changed. She had a sister, a twin, someone who might understand her better than anyone else in the world simply because they were genetically identical. The thought overwhelmed her and comforted her, but at the same time it frightened her. And then she remembered Leon and the ring he had given her. When she got home, Shantae ordered a DNA test kit. It was supposed to arrive in 3 days, just in time for their next meeting with Jamie. Then she stood in the shower for a long time, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Leon called that evening. "Hi, baby." His voice sounded tense. "I won't be able to meet you tomorrow. Something came up at work." "Is everything okay?" Shantae asked, sensing something was wrong. "You sound different. Just tired," he replied. "Listen, you mentioned a woman at the clinic yesterday. She looked like you. Did you find out who she was?" Shantae froze, holding the phone to her ear. Why was he asking? Something in his voice made her wary. "No," she lied. "I must have imagined it." "It happens. You see someone in passing and think they look like you or someone you know." "Probably," Leon agreed, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Okay, I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up, and Shantae sat there staring at the screen of her phone. Something was wrong. Something was happening, and she didn't understand what. On Friday, Shantae woke up with an uneasy feeling. She had had a strange dream. She was running through a maze of corridors, and around every turn her own reflection was waiting for her, only each time it was slightly different. In one mirror, she was a little boy, in another, a teenager with piercings, and in the third, a woman in a wedding dress. And everywhere behind her loomed the dark figure of Leon, sometimes approaching, sometimes disappearing. She couldn't settle down all day. The DNA test kit had arrived in the morning, and now Shantae was nervously twirling it in her hands, thinking about her upcoming meeting with Jamie. At 11:30, the phone rang. It was Leon's number. "Hi," she answered. "I thought you were at work." "I took the day off." His voice sounded strange, tense, almost frightened. "Shantae, can I pick you up? We need to talk." "I can't right now," she replied, feeling an unpleasant chill run down her spine. "I have a meeting at noon." "At the clinic?" he asked too quickly. Shantae froze. "Why do you ask?" "Never mind," he said, now with something like desperation in his voice. I'll pick you up later, okay? Tell me what time you'll be free." "Around 2, I think," Shantae replied, not understanding what was going on. "Leon, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he replied after a pause. "I just miss you. I want to see you. See you later, baby." He hung up, leaving Shantae completely baffled. Something was definitely wrong. Leon had never acted like this before. He had never asked about her visits to the clinic, and he had never come to pick her up without arranging it in advance. Shantae looked at the DNA test kit in her hands, thinking about Jamie, about their incredible resemblance, about the secret they could uncover together, and about Leon's strange behavior. Something told her that all these things were connected, and that the answer might be much more terrifying than she could imagine. Dr. Wilson's clinic greeted Shantae with silence and cool air conditioning, a welcome respite from the July heat of New Orleans. It was 20 minutes to 12. She had arrived early, unable to sit at home waiting. She clutched a small envelope containing the DNA test results that had arrived that morning. Loretta looked up from the reception desk and smiled at her. "Miss Williams, you're early. Miss Freeman isn't here yet." "I'll wait," Shantae said, sitting down in a chair in the waiting room. "Are you sure she's coming?" "She called half an hour ago to confirm," Loretta replied. "She said she might be a little late because of traffic." Shantae nodded and leaned back in her chair, trying to breathe evenly. Excitement washed over her like a tidal wave. Meeting Jamie had turned her whole life upside down. It was as if she had been looking at the world through fogged-up glass, and now someone had wiped it clean, and everything was crystal clear. The reception door opened, and Jamie walked in, wearing a dark blue dress with a white collar, as if she had just come from work. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant bun, and she wore light makeup. Looking at her, Shantae saw what she could have become under different circumstances, a more reserved, more traditional version of herself. "You're already here," Jamie smiled, coming closer. I was afraid I'd be late. I couldn't sit at home, Shantae admitted, getting up to meet her. And the results came this morning. Jamie nodded toward the envelope in her hands. What do they say? Shantae glanced at Loretta, who was watching them with undisguised curiosity. Maybe we should go to the lounge, she suggested. Of course, girls, Loretta nodded without waiting for a question. She's all yours today. The break room was empty, just like last time. Shantae and Jamie sat down next to each other on the couch, the sealed envelope with the lab logo between them. To be honest, I already know the answer, Jamie said, looking at the envelope. But it's still scary. Me too, Shantae nodded. Should we open it? Jamie nodded. Shantae tore open the envelope and took out the folded sheets of paper. Together, they leaned over the test results. With a probability of 99.9%, the samples belonged to monozygotic, identical twins. That's it, Shantae said quietly. We're officially sisters. Jamie made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and suddenly hugged Shantae. They sat there for a while, just holding each other, two halves of a whole, separated at birth and miraculously finding each other 35 years later. Why were we separated? Jamie asked when they finally pulled apart. Why were we given to different families? Maybe we'll never know, Shantae sighed. Our biological mother, whoever she was, probably didn't want us to look for her. Otherwise, she would have left some information. Or she would have found us herself, Jamie added. I wonder if she knows who we've become. Would she accept our choices? Shantae smiled bitterly. Our adoptive parents couldn't. Mine didn't either. Jamie shook her head. When I told them I wanted to have the surgery, my father said he never wanted to see me again. My mother tried to take my side, but in the end, she chose him. We're so alike. Shantae squeezed her hand. Not just physically. Everything we've been through. It's like our lives were on parallel tracks. Jamie nodded. We even made the decision to transition at around the same age, and we both ended up in New Orleans. And at the same clinic, Shantae added. It can't be a coincidence. You know what's strange? Jamie leaned closer, as if about to share a secret. I always felt like something was missing. Even after transitioning, even when I looked like who I always felt inside, there was still this void, emptiness. Now I understand. It was you. Shantae nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. I know, I felt that too, my whole life. They talked for over an hour about their childhood dreams, the difficulties of transitioning, how they survived in a world that wasn't always kind to people like them. Gradually, the conversation turned to the present, and Jamie asked cautiously, Do you have someone? I mean, romantically? Shantae hesitated. They had avoided the subject of their personal lives until now, and there was something unsettling about the way Jamie asked the question. Yes, I do, she finally replied. But it's complicated. He has commitments. Married? Jamie asked bluntly. Shantae nodded. What about you? I'm married, Jamie replied. For 5 years. But something has changed lately. He's been pulling away. I think he's seeing someone else. Shantae felt a pang of guilt. She herself was someone else to another woman's husband. Have you tried talking to him? Many times, Jamie smiled bitterly. He denies everything. He says it's work, that the department is swamped, that he's been assigned extra shifts. The department? Shantae felt a chill run down her spine. Is he a cop? Yes, Jamie nodded. Officer Leon Freeman. Maybe you've heard of him? He works at the 6th Precinct. The world around Shantae began to spin. Leon, her Leon, and Jamie. Leon's wife. The woman who had kept him from being with her. The woman whose name he had never uttered. Her sister. Her identical twin. Shantae, are you okay? Jamie's voice sounded distant. You look pale. Shantae couldn't find the words. What should she say? How could she explain? At that moment, the door to the break room swung open and Leon appeared in the doorway. His gaze swept over the women sitting nearby, and his face showed confusion, followed by shock. Leon? Jamie stood up from the couch. What are you doing here? He looked from her to Shantae and back, clearly trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I came for Shantae. We agreed to meet. There was a silence, thick and sticky like a swamp. Jamie slowly turned to Shantae, her eyes widening with understanding. Shantae? Her voice was barely audible. Is he, you're the one? Shantae couldn't speak. She couldn't even nod. But her silence spoke louder than any words. Do you two know each other? Leon took a step into the room, his gaze darting between the two identical women. What's going on here? We're sisters, Leon, Jamie said quietly, picking up the test results. Twins, separated at birth. And apparently we fell in love with the same man. Sisters? Leon shook his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. Twins? But that's impossible. Here's the proof. Jamie handed him the test results. We did a DNA test. Identical twins. Leon took the sheets and began to read. His face changed with every second. Disbelief, surprise, shock. Suddenly he froze, staring at one particular line in the report. What is this? His voice became hoarse. It says biological sex, male, for both samples. Shantae and Jamie exchanged glances. Sure enough, a complete genetic report always included chromosome markers that determined biological sex. Is this a mistake? Leon looked up, his eyes reflecting his confusion. Is this some kind of lab error? No, Leon, Jamie said quietly. It's not a mistake. We were both born boys. Leon looked at them both, his face contorted like a cracked mirror. All this time, he whispered. All this time I thought. I believed. Shantae took a step forward. Leon, listen. We've always been women inside. It's just our bodies. Shut up! He shouted, recoiling as if from a blow. Don't talk to me! You both! You lied to me! We didn't lie to anyone, Jamie said firmly. We were just living our lives. Being a woman doesn't mean having a certain set of chromosomes. Leon's face contorted with rage. I've lived with you for 5 years, he hissed, staring at Jamie. 5 years! And with you, he turned to Shanta. I thought I'd found my soulmate. And all this time. His hand jerked toward his belt, where his service pistol lay in its holster. No! Jamie cried, taking a step forward. Leon, don't do it! But it was too late. The gun was already in his hand, and his eyes, the eyes that had once looked at them with love, were now filled with hatred and disgust. You had no right, he said. You had no right to do this to me. The first shot rang out deafeningly. The bullet entered Jamie's chest, throwing her back onto the sofa. Shantae rushed to her sister, but the second shot stopped her. The blow to her stomach was unexpectedly dull, almost painless. Only a burning heat and a strange weakness spread through her body. Shantae fell to her knees. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed them against the wound. Jamie lay on the sofa, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her eyes wide open but already losing focus. Leon stood over them, the gun in his hand still pointed at them. His face was frozen in a mask of disgust and shock, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. You lying bastards, he said through clenched teeth. Shantae felt herself weakening, her vision blurred. She reached out and found Jamie's hand, the same as her own, with the same long fingers, the same shape of nails, the same skin tone. In that moment, all other differences became meaningless. There was a noise outside the door, shouting, footsteps. Loretta's voice, shrill and frightened. There's been a shooting in the recreation room. Call the police. Leon jerked as if he had been struck. He looked at the gun in his hand, then back at the women on the floor. Something flashed in his eyes, not remorse, but realization. You had no right, he said quietly. You had no right to do this to me. He turned and rushed for the door. A second later, his footsteps echoed down the hallway. Shantae felt a chill rise from her feet to her chest. A strange numbness spread through her body. She turned her head and saw Jamie's eyes, exactly like her own. There was no fear in them, only something like weary acceptance. Sounds came through as if through cotton wool, screams in the hallway, approaching sirens, footsteps. Everything faded. Jamie's hand in hers grew cold. The last thing Shante saw before closing her eyes were the blood-spattered test results. "Hello, sister," she thought. "Goodbye, sister."